I was pouring my first cup of coffee when I heard the knock. At that hour, no one ever came by. My mornings had been quiet for years, filled with the sound of the kettle and the low hum of the radio in the kitchen. When I glanced through the window and saw the white SUV in my driveway, my chest tightened. I hadn't seen that car in almost a decade. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 67 years old, a retired nurse who has lived in this house in Vermont since Robert, my husband, passed away. The house has been both my comfort and my burden. Too many empty rooms, too many memories. I had gotten used to the silence, to the way the days stretched on without a call or a visit from my only son. But that morning, Daniel stood on my porch like nothing had happened. Next to him was Sophie, the woman he had chosen over family years ago. She held a bouquet of lilies, her smile bright and rehearsed, as if flowers could erase 7 years of absence. Daniel's hand rested lightly on her back, an awkward gesture that only made the distance between us feel wider. "Hi, Mom," he said, like those years had been no more than a pause. Sophie leaned forward, her perfume filling my doorway. "Surprise! We thought we'd stop by. Your backyard is perfect for our wedding." Her voice rang with certainty, not request. She stepped inside before I could even speak, her heels clicking against the wood floor as if she owned it. Daniel followed her, his eyes scanning the living room. "Yeah, we already told the planner. It's just one day. You'll host it." He said it like I was a venue, not his mother. I stood there frozen, my hand still holding the doorframe. They hadn't called for my birthday, not when I had heart surgery, not even when I buried Robert. Yet here they were, talking about arches and photographs, expecting me to nod along. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw them out. I simply watched them, and in that silence, a new thought formed, one they would never see coming. 7 years earlier, on the night everything cracked, Daniel had looked me straight in the eye and told me I was holding him back. His voice hadn't shaken, and he didn't shout. He simply said, "Mom, you're dead weight. I need a life without you dragging me down." I remember the words more clearly than I remember the weather that night. Sophie stood beside him, arms crossed, silent but complicit. They left in his old car, taillights bleeding into the darkness. And I stood on the porch until the sound of the engine disappeared. After that, silence became my closest companion. There were no calls on Christmas mornings, no text messages on birthdays. When I had heart surgery 3 years ago, I lay in recovery counting ceiling tiles, knowing my son hadn't even checked whether I was alive. When Robert died, I buried him with only a few neighbors at my side. Daniel never sent a single flower. I built a life around the emptiness, shaping each day carefully so it wouldn't cave in. I learned to take my coffee slowly, to read the paper front to back, even the classifieds I didn't need. I filled afternoons with tending to my garden, humming softly while clipping rosemary, sometimes speaking out loud as if Robert were still listening. The quiet was heavy, but at least it was mine. Still. At night, the house pressed down on me. I would hear echoes of Daniel's laughter in the hallway, the scrape of his shoes on the kitchen tile. I'd tell myself memory was a cruel guest, always showing up uninvited. So when he walked back in, demanding my home for his wedding, it wasn't just entitlement that stung. It was the realization that all those years of silence had meant nothing to him. He could erase them with a single sentence, and that was when I knew this wasn't over. A few days after their visit, the phone rang while I was folding laundry in the den. I almost didn't answer. I'd grown used to calls being wrong numbers or reminders from the pharmacy, but the cheerful voice on the line wasn't either. "Hello, this is Bloom and Vine Floral. We're confirming delivery for the Carter wedding at 212 Willow Lane. That's 150 chairs, 18 tables, 6 canopies, and altar arrangements, all scheduled for September 18th. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. "Excuse me?" I asked, clutching the receiver tighter. "Yes, ma'am. Delivery to the backyard. Just want to double-check we have the right address." My pulse steadied, too calm, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. "This is Evelyn Carter," I said. "But I never ordered any of that." The line went quiet for a beat. Then the woman apologized, promising to confirm with the client, but I didn't need her to. I already knew. There was only one person who would have used my name and my address like they were free for the taking. I hung up and stood in the middle of my living room, staring at the framed photographs along the shelf. Daniel, at age 8, holding a fishing pole. Daniel blowing out birthday candles. Daniel in his cap and gown. Not a single recent picture. Not one with Sophie. Outside. The garden swayed gently in the late summer breeze. The same garden they thought they could claim as their own stage. That night, I sat at my kitchen table long after the dishes were washed and put away. The house was too quiet, yet I couldn't bring myself to turn on the television. I kept replaying the woman's voice, cheerful and unsuspecting, confirming a wedding that wasn't mine, and I had the sinking feeling this was only the beginning. 2 nights later, I opened my old email account, the one I rarely checked anymore. It was mostly spam and newsletters I never unsubscribed from. But one subject line froze me. Balance due. Carter wedding. My stomach dropped as I clicked it open. The invoice stared back at me, crisp and official. Total, $1,200. The payment method listed was a joint credit card I had once shared with Daniel when he was in college. I thought I had closed every account after Robert died, combed through papers and folders, cut up plastic with shaking hands. Yet somehow this one had slipped through the cracks, or maybe Daniel had found a way to revive it. Either way, the money wasn't his. It was mine. I printed the invoice and laid it flat on the kitchen table. The numbers glared under the lamplight, but my hands didn't tremble. No burst of shouting, no tears. Just a cold steadiness that reminded me of nights at the hospital when patients coded and panic swirled. But I had to stay calm enough to save them. I thought of Robert then, how he used to say, "Don't ever let anyone tell you your worth. Evie, you decide that yourself." He'd said it during lean years, when bills piled high and Daniel was still a boy with scraped knees and endless questions. Back then, I believed our love would carry us all. Now, staring at the evidence of theft committed by my own son, I felt something shift. It wasn't rage exactly. It was sharper, colder, like glass breaking underfoot. I folded the invoice and slipped it into the pocket of my planner. Then I opened the drawer where I kept an old address book, pages yellowed from use. My finger stopped at a name I hadn't spoken in years, Martha Lewis. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The number felt strange under my fingertips as I dialed, like reaching for a part of my past I hadn't touched in years. When Martha's voice came through, warm and steady as I remembered, I almost forgot why I had called. "Evelyn?" she asked, surprise in her tone. "Are you all right?" I took a breath. "Tell me, does the community center still need a venue for that group wedding project you mentioned years ago?" There was a pause. Then I heard her shuffle papers, the sound of a pencil clattering to a desk. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said. When she arrived 2 days later, her sensible shoes crunching across the gravel path, I felt something stir in me I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She carried her worn leather notebook, already flipping through pages as she stepped into the backyard. "This is beautiful," Martha murmured, her eyes sweeping across the wide lawn, the old willow tree near the fence, the soft slope of the garden. "Are you sure about this?" "Completely." She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She began sketching layouts, where chairs could curve beneath the branches, how a canopy might frame the arbor. She told me about the couples, 6 in all. One had met in a homeless shelter. Another had waited 12 years, always putting off a ceremony because rent and medical bills came first. None of them wanted extravagance. They just wanted to be seen, to stand in front of witnesses and say, "We matter too." I watched her scribble notes, my heart steady, no longer weighed down. Daniel thought this garden belonged to his entitlement. Sophie thought it was a backdrop for photos. But I knew better. This yard would be a beginning, a stage for people who had earned joy the hard way. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to fight for something worth celebrating. By the end of that week, the house no longer felt like mine alone. Volunteers from the community center began arriving in small groups, their laughter spilling through the gate as they carried folding chairs, crates of donated flowers, and bundles of string lights. The garden that had stood in silence for so many years now buzzed with life. Teenagers climbed ladders to drape lights across the branches, their sneakers squeaking on the rungs. Retired neighbors offered trays of sandwiches to the workers, while younger couples bent over sketch pads, planning seating arrangements with a seriousness that made me smile. The 6 couples came often, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, pitching in like it was their own backyard. One afternoon, I watched Emily and Jordan, who had met at a grief support group, test the sound system with a borrowed microphone. Their voices cracked with nervous laughter as they practiced vows that weren't yet written. Another evening, Rosa and Miguel, together for 15 years, arrived with their teenage sons to help hammer stakes into the ground. The boys argued over who could carry more chairs, their energy filling corners of the yard that had once felt so hollow. I stood near the kitchen window most days, pretending to tidy the counter, but really I was watching the arbor take shape with ribbons and eucalyptus, watching faces glow in the golden hour light, watching my empty lawn become something tender, something needed. More than once, I felt Robert close by, as though he were standing with me at the window, reminding me this was what love was meant to look like, not obligation, not guilt, but hands joined together to build something lasting. And with each passing day, as September 18th drew nearer, I realized I wasn't afraid of what Daniel and Sophie had planned anymore, because this wedding, the real wedding, was already alive in my backyard. The morning of September 18th began in a haze of soft light and quiet birdsong. For a moment, as I sipped my coffee by the kitchen window, I could almost believe it was just another day. But before long, the sound of tires on gravel shattered the illusion. Trucks rolled in, doors slammed, and voices filled the yard. By 8 o'clock, the place was alive. Volunteers carried in trays of food, loaves of fresh bread, baskets of fruit, pitchers of lemonade sweating in the late summer sun. The scent of carnations drifted through the open windows as bundles of flowers were arranged along the fence line. Laughter rippled across the lawn when a group of teenagers strung paper lanterns too low and had to redo the whole line, joking and teasing each other as they worked. Inside the garage, makeshift dressing areas had been set up with mirrors and strands of lights taped to the beams. I peeked in long enough to see 2 brides adjusting each other's veils, their hands trembling with nervous excitement. In the guest room upstairs, I heard muffled giggles as another couple practiced a first dance in their socks, sliding across the hardwood floors. Around mid-morning, Lena Torres arrived, her notepad tucked under one arm, camera strap looped around her shoulder. She greeted me warmly, then stepped back into the whirl of activity, snapping photos, interviewing volunteers, already capturing the story I knew would matter far beyond this backyard. I stayed by the window for most of it, letting the hum of preparation wash over me. This wasn't my wedding, it wasn't even my story anymore. It belonged to them, the 6 couples who had waited so long to be seen. Still, As I set my empty mug on the counter and straightened my shoulders, I knew the day wasn't finished with me yet, because before long, Daniel and Sophie would arrive. And when they did, the truth would meet them head on. At 2 o'clock sharp, the sound of tires crunching over gravel cut through the music. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. The white SUV pulled up near the mailbox, gleaming too brightly in the afternoon sun. Daniel stepped out first, dressed in a tuxedo far too crisp for a backyard afternoon. Sophie followed, lifting the hem of her lace gown as if she were walking into a ballroom. Her smile faltered the moment her eyes landed on the scene before her. Rows of chairs already filled with guests, string lights glowing in broad daylight, 6 couples standing near the arbor, bouquets in hand, laughter spilling like music. Above it all, the banner flapping gently in the breeze, community wedding celebration, united in love. Sophie froze, her painted lips parting in disbelief. Daniel's jaw tightened, color draining from his face. For a few seconds they stood still, caught between expectation and reality. Then Sophie stormed forward, her heels stabbing the grass with every step. "This is our wedding!" she shouted, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "You knew this was our date!" She slapped at one of the centerpieces, knocking over a jar of baby's breath. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I stepped off the porch, each wooden step steady beneath my feet. Behind me stood Lena, camera raised, already capturing the moment. "No," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "This is their wedding." Sophie spun toward me, fury blazing. "You ruined everything. You used a credit card that wasn't yours." I answered plainly. "Every deposit, every delivery, every stolen cent. I filed a fraud report. My lawyer is ready." Daniel's eyes locked on mine. "You chose strangers over me." His voice cracked, a boy's echo inside a man's frame. I held his gaze. "No, you made that choice years ago." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Sophie trembled, Daniel clenched his fists, and the crowd waited. Finally, without another word, they turned back toward the SUV, and I knew the real celebration had only just begun. The SUV pulled away in a spray of gravel dust, its tires spinning faster than the silence it left behind. For a long moment, no one moved. Guests sat frozen. Forks paused mid-air, musicians holding their instruments in mid-note. Then, slowly, the rhythm of the day returned. Someone strummed a guitar again, tentative at first, then stronger. Conversations picked up in cautious whispers that soon grew into laughter. The scent of grilled vegetables and fresh bread drifted back across the lawn, as though nothing had been interrupted at all. Inside the tent, the couples gathered near the arbor. I watched as Emily and Jordan, hands trembling, spoke their vows in halting voices. Rosa wiped her eyes as Miguel kissed her cheek, their sons clapping wildly from the front row. Every word, every promise felt raw and honest, stripped of pretense. I stayed near the edge of the lawn, not wanting to intrude. This wasn't about me, it never had been, but still, I felt the weight of something loosen inside my chest, as if the years of silence had finally cracked open to let something gentler through. A small tug on my dress pulled me from my thoughts. I looked down to see a little girl, no more than 6, her front teeth missing, glitter smudged across her cheeks. She held up a folded card with both hands. "I made this for you," she said shyly. The front was scrawled in marker. "Thank you for our big day." Inside, stick figures stood beneath a string of lights, all smiling. My throat tightened as I knelt to hug her. It wasn't the kind of hug you gave politely. It was the kind you held longer, because you knew it meant something. And as the music swelled and the couples danced barefoot on the grass, I realized I had just witnessed a wedding worth remembering. A week later, the garden still bore the marks of that day, flattened patches of grass where chairs had stood, stray petals pressed into the soil, yet life was already pushing back. Green blades rose through the dents, wildflowers sprouted where the arbor once stood. Every morning I walked the yard with my coffee, letting the quiet feel different now. Not heavy, but alive. On Thursday afternoon, an email arrived from the bank. Fraud claim approved. Amount refunded, $10,200. I stared at the number, the same digits that had once filled me with anger. This time, I clicked a few keys and transferred it straight into the community fund Martha managed. That money would now cover license fees and court filings for couples who otherwise couldn't afford them. What had been stolen from me would become someone else's beginning. Not long after, Georgia, a friend from town, sent me a screenshot of Sophie's social media, a photo of her standing alone on a balcony in her wedding dress, captioned with dramatic words, "Some wounds never heal. Some betrayals echo forever." Comments poured in with sympathy, but there was no mention of Daniel, no ring, no new date. By Friday, it was clear. Their wedding was off. Daniel, however, didn't post anything. He sent me one email, no greeting, no warmth, just one bitter line. "I never expected this from you." I let it sit in my drafts for an hour before I typed back. That's the problem. I never heard from him again, but I heard plenty from others. Handwritten thank you notes arrived from every couple. Children's drawings taped in crayon. One even laminated, covered my fridge door. Each one said, in their own way, "You made us visible." One evening, Martha sat with me on the porch, sipping coffee as the sun dipped low. "I didn't think it would feel like peace," I admitted quietly. "That's what love does," she replied. "It doesn't destroy, it rebuilds." And as the last light spread across the garden, I finally believed her. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.